The name Oskar Dirlewanger still evokes horror, even among those familiar with the darkest chapters of World War II. As the commander of a battalion notorious for its brutalities on occupied territories, he turned murder, violence, and torture into a daily practice. However, Dirlewanger's cruelty and that of his subordinates went beyond military crimes. It reached such extreme levels that even his fellow Nazis were shocked. He was one of the few Nazi commanders whose methods even repulsed other members of the SS. His own comrades called him a bloodthirsty butcher, and his units were likened to a gang of robbers and rapists. Dirlewanger personally participated in tortures and executions. He not only gave orders but often took sadistic pleasure in carrying them out himself. He organized parties where he engaged in sadistic shows, forcing captive women to strip, dance, and then killing them, all while observing their suffering. This is just a glimpse into the long list of crimes committed by this man, which you will uncover in this video. How could such an individual lead one of the most inhumane, punitive squads in history? The atrocities committed by Dirlewanger were not only tolerated, but actively encouraged at the highest levels. His story is not just a tale of brutality, it is a story of absolute darkness within the human soul, where murder became a form of entertainment and violence a tool of terror. During the time of the Third Reich, it served as a launching pad for individuals who, under different circumstances, would have been shunned by prominent German officers and politicians. The first meeting between Hitler and the then President of Germany, Paul von Hindenburg, is a testament to this. Eyewitnesses reported that Hindenburg looked upon the Bavarian private with almost contempt, but such was the time when absolute nobodies rose to prominence overnight, their actions holding the power of life and death over thousands. One such figure in the history of Germany during the 1930s and 1940s was Oskar Paul Dirlewanger. Dirlewanger's criminal journey began with a privileged start. Born into a wealthy Swabian family, he was an unusually quiet and calm child. His childhood and youth were unremarkable, resembling those of other children from well-off families. Those who knew him personally would never have believed that this pious child, obediently attending church, would grow up to be a ruthless executioner. Everything seemed to be going well until, just before his university enrollment in 1913, Dirlewanger chose to join the army of Kaiser Wilhelm. After a year of service, he earned an officer's commission in 1914, the same year World War I began. The future SS officer actively participated in the war, earning 2 Iron Crosses, the rank of lieutenant, and a position as a company commander. However, during this time, his true nature began to reveal itself. Dirlewanger quickly realized that looting the civilian population during wartime was a common practice that went unpunished, and he took full advantage of this opportunity. These skills would serve him well later in life. After the war, Dirlewanger participated in suppressing revolutionary uprisings in Germany in 1918-19, where his punitive and sadistic tendencies first came to light. In a relatively short period, Dirlewanger held various jobs. He worked as a tax advisor, a factory manager, and a bank clerk, but consistently found himself involved in scandals related to bribery and theft. It is astonishing how he managed to avoid prison, only facing dismissals. Meanwhile, Dirlewanger kept a close eye on the political landscape in the country. He was a member of the Freikorps for a time, participating in the suppression of pro-communist masses, while simultaneously witnessing the internal strengthening of the ultra-Nazi ideology. Dirlewanger harbored a particular hatred for Jews, and as he sensed the approach of great changes, he understood the need to acquire some credentials to present to the Nazi Party. He enrolled in a commercial school, but was expelled again, this time for anti-Semitism. However, he somehow managed to graduate from the University of Frankfurt on the Main and even earned a doctoral degree. He also made attempts to join the SS, but Dirlewanger was a patient man, and in 1933, when the Nazi Party officially came to power, he secured a position as the head of a department, a small but significant power that began to unveil his true character. True to form, Dirlewanger managed to get himself involved in various scandals related to corruption and theft, and his frequent abuse of his position added to his reputation. There was also a notable progression in his deviant behavior, as he developed a passion for underage girls and had a habit of entertaining himself with them. This time, his usual luck ran out, and he was caught red-handed as a pedophile. He was expelled from the party, stripped of all his titles and awards, and even served time in prison. This was a severe blow, but his connections and friendships with influential people paid off, and within 2 years, the libertine was released from prison and sent to fight in Spain for General Franco as part of the Condor Legion. In Spain, he once again distinguished himself, and upon his return in 1939, Dirlewanger was reinstated in the Nazi Party, the SS, and promoted to the rank of Untersturmführer. This marked the beginning of the story of the most brutal, punitive unit. Despite the official decorum of the SS, Dirlewanger and his men were guided by the principle that personnel is policy. Therefore, they kept Oscar close, understanding that he could be a valuable asset. Soon, an opportunity presented itself to showcase his true nature. As war preparations required the mobilization of a vast number of troops, the German command realized the need to utilize all available resources. Thus, they decided to create several penal battalions, composed of convicted criminals. Dirlewanger's patron, Gottlob Berger, the chief of the SS and Himmler's deputy, convinced his superior of the necessity of forming a special penal team within the SS ranks. Here, Dirlewanger was tasked with creating a team of criminals, primarily poachers, convicted of poaching. However, over time, professional criminals, murderers, and thieves also joined the team. In 1940, the SS Penal Unit, consisting of 84 men, was formed. Initially conceived as an elite punitive group for suppressing rebellions and combating partisans, the unit quickly devolved into a gang due to a lack of discipline and their brutal treatment of anyone who crossed their path. Their actions exceeded the boundaries of typical military operations, even by Nazi standards, which were not known for their humane treatment of civilians. The Sonderkommando Dirlewanger, also known as the Oranienburg Hunting Squad, was characterized by its ruthless and disregard for the laws of war. Under Dirlewanger's command, the unit became one of the most merciless and terrifying divisions during the war. Dirlewanger was devoid of human emotion, and his long history of personally committing numerous atrocities had turned him into a monster. He derived pleasure from watching children and women being tortured in his presence, and he looked on with genuine joy as villages were burned to the ground with their inhabitants. The scoundrels serving under him adored him for his lack of moral principles, which allowed them to commit any atrocity without restraint. The villages were burned to ashes, the population was systematically exterminated, girls and women were raped, but for the Third Reich, these were considered victories. Thus, in 1942, Dirlewanger was promoted to Oberführer and appointed as the general governor, showing no mercy to his opponents and none to his own soldiers, knowing that the penal units would be constantly replenished with new convicts from German prisons. He threw his soldiers into machine gun fire without hesitation, even when the victory was not worth the losses. But for the marginals living for the day, it was not considered a crime against them. The main thing was that they were allowed to kill and plunder. The Sonderkommando Dirlewanger, a terrorist punitive group, had two primary tasks. First, to track down and eliminate partisan units or counter larger partisan formations, and second, to carry out ruthless punitive actions, essentially engaging in the genocide of the occupied population. The latter task was something the unit excelled at. although they also caused problems for the partisans. Dirlewanger's unit specialized in tactics that involved the destruction of the civilian population in retaliation for their support of the partisans. These actions created an atmosphere of fear and horror on the occupied territories. Particularly barbaric was their approach to the destruction of entire villages and towns, where they killed people on the slightest suspicion of collaboration with the resistance. In essence, every person on these territories was a potential victim, even if they were completely innocent. Such actions were followed by mass tortures to extract any information, and then by executions, regardless of whether the person was involved in partisan activities or not. The Sonderkommando Dirlewanger first made its mark in Poland, starting in 1940. Here, they were tasked with guarding the perimeters of the ghettos, escorting prisoners and arrested civilians for transport to concentration camps. It was on the prisoners of the fascist concentration camps that the members of the Sonderkommando Battalion trained and honed their terrifying skills. The Sonderkommando used the prisoners of the concentration camps as training targets for their soldiers, subjecting them to brutal tortures and executions to allow the soldiers to refine their skills and become accustomed to acts of violence. This became a peculiar school for the battalion's soldiers, where violence became routine. Such practices were unofficially approved at the highest levels, as it was believed that they contributed to the hardening of the fighters. Simultaneously, Dirlewanger was engaged in combating Polish insurgents. A particular characteristic of this criminal rabble in SS uniforms was that they took no prisoners. They would first torment the captured insurgents and then kill them all. The Sonderkommando Dirlewanger committed particularly barbaric acts against captured partisans. Any encounter with partisans ended in a brutal massacre, and many prisoners were subjected to horrific tortures before being executed. Sometimes, to instill fear, Dirlewanger would organize public executions, forcing local residents to watch the cruel retribution against the partisans. This was part of their terror psychology. They aimed not only to physically destroy the enemy, but also to break the morale of the population. The achievements of these men were duly appreciated by the head of the police in the Lublin district, who sent complimentary telegrams to the SS Reich Main Security Office. Even some services and units of the SS considered Dirlewanger a bloodthirsty butcher, a marauder, and a robber, which was the truth. The warriors of this gang behaved like criminals, killing, raping, and looting without any provocation. The commander turned a blind eye to the antics of his subordinates, as he himself could give anyone a run for their money in terms of cruelty. For example, Dirlewanger once organized a party at his apartment for subordinate officers as well as officers from the local SD and SS. At his command, 10 Jewish girls were brought in, and Dirlewanger forced the unfortunate women to strip naked and dance to music. They were whipped, insulted, and subjected to various forms of abuse. When the host and his guests tired of this entertainment, Dirlewanger personally killed all the girls by injecting them with strychnine. The entire company watched with pleasure as the girls suffered their agonizing deaths. Such horrors were not uncommon in the practices of the Sonderkommando, and numerous testimonies confirmed that such entertainments were regularly arranged, as if human lives held no value. Dirlewanger and his team killed without the slightest hesitation, guided by a level of inhumanity that even among the notoriously cruel Nazis stood out for its exceptional cruelty and lack of any moral limitations. His reputation reached the highest echelons of the SS, but instead of punishment, he continued to receive promotions and awards, which only reinforced his sense of impunity. When numerous letters and complaints started pouring in to the SS leadership, even from Germans and SS members themselves, about Dirlewanger's activities, which mostly focused on his relationships with racially inferior women, and his looting, the report concluded by proposing that Dirlewanger be arrested and his unit disbanded. However, the SS and Nazi Party leadership decided otherwise. The SS transferred Dirlewanger to the east, to Belarus, where he was tasked with guarding the Mogilev ghetto and simultaneously engaged in combating partisans. Throughout World War II, Dirlewanger's group actively participated in many operations against partisan units and formations. The experience of the poachers and hunters in this punitive unit proved invaluable. The battalion's snipers and scouts tracked and set up sniper ambushes, causing significant problems for the local partisans. After battles, the Sonderkommando carried out ruthless punitive operations against the civilian population. According to the investigation, Dirlewanger's battalion was responsible for burning over 180 villages where the inhabitants were partially or completely destroyed. Typically, the punitive squads herded the residents into a local club or stable, doused the walls with kerosene, propped up the entrance doors, and set them on fire. They also used fire, but sometimes, for entertainment, they left the doors unpropped, and when the people, mostly women and children, panicked and tried to rush out of the burning building, the punitive squads shot them with Lamatovs and submachine guns. Before the burning, Dirlewanger could subject those suspected of collaborating with the partisans to torture. People were beaten with feet, sticks, whips, rifle butts, impaled with pitchforks, or cut with knives, so that the cuts were not too deep but numerous. People could be hung by their feet or hands, by one hand or leg, or by the neck. In short, they demonstrated their sadistic inventiveness, and the number of victims of the most ruthless SS battalion grew. Simultaneously, the ranks of their commander, Dirlewanger, also grew. In 1941, he was already a Sturmbannführer SS, a major, and in 1942, a lieutenant colonel. In 1943, he was promoted to Standartenführer SS, a full colonel. The Nazi leadership did not forget about rewarding their hero, bestowing upon him the Iron Cross, the Silver Cross, and other decorations. The relationships within the battalion were twofold. On the one hand, it was a military unit composed of criminals, and a subordinate could be beaten with sticks, placed in a guardhouse for several days, or thrown into a pit, depending on the location and circumstances, or even killed. This was the only military unit in the SS where the commander could shoot a subordinate without trial or investigation, and Dirlewanger got away with it. The methods employed by the battalion in the fight against partisans and the suppression of urban uprisings were incredibly brutal. The punitive squads, operating under the cover of the SS, allowed Dirlewanger to approach the enemy safely. This was a common practice for the SS, who used the same method to check for partisan mines on roads and trails, sending local residents to suspicious areas. If anyone refused, they were shot. The activities of the Sonderkommando included the execution of one partisan and 286 collaborators, the execution of 2 partisans, and 176 suspects. The end of the executioner came at the end of 1943, when the German command had to plug the gaps with whatever they could. Dirlewanger found himself on the front lines, but it was not a place where the punitive squads excelled. When placed in an unfamiliar situation on the front, the battalion suffered significant losses. Within a few weeks of fighting, by January 1944, Dirlewanger had lost half of his unit, forcing the German command to withdraw the battalion from the front and return them to their usual sadistic pursuits against the local population. As the Germans retreated westward, leaving a bloody trail, on August 1, 1944, the Warsaw Uprising began. Dirlewanger's battalion was transformed into a brigade consisting of around 1,000 soldiers, which was deployed to the Polish capital to suppress the uprising. The brigade's ranks were filled with SS penal troops, and its numerical strength increased to 2,500. During the suppression of the uprising, Dirlewanger employed his usual methods, taking hostages as a human shield from the residents, executing and shooting prisoners, burning houses with insurgents, and burning hospitals with the sick, wounded, and medical personnel. As a result of the brigade's advancement, The commander himself, for his distinction in suppressing the uprising, was awarded the Knight's Cross and promoted to Oberfuhrer. The unit was further bolstered by another batch of penal troops and convicts, and it was sent to Slovakia, where an uprising had also begun. The brigade once again fully justified the trust of the SS High Command, acting in the same manner as in Belarus and Warsaw, taking hostages, engaging in provocations, and terrorizing the civilian population. However, the war was drawing to a close, and Hitler's Germany was in its last months. On February 14, 1945, by order, Dirlewanger's brigade was transformed into the 36th Grenadier Division in Hungary, where heavy fighting was underway. A day after the order, Dirlewanger was sent to a hospital for treatment, and he never returned. Fritz Schmedes, who had previously commanded the 4th SS Police Panzer Grenadier Division, was appointed as the acting commander of the division. The newly formed division, along with the remnants of the German troops defeated in Hungary, retreated westward. The commander himself, the Ober-Executioner, was detained by a French patrol in the town of Althausen. He tried to pass himself off as someone else, but a Jewish former concentration camp inmate recognized him. Dirlewanger was imprisoned in the town jail. The reason for this was that there were many Poles serving in the French forces, and they also served in the prison guard. The Poles knew what kind of bird had fallen into their hands, so in violation of the regulations, the convoy subjected the executioner to daily executions. The executioner's body could not withstand the beatings, and after the next beating, Dirlewanger died.